Part 1, Section 1, Track 1, Intro. It was a bright spring afternoon when young Virgil Tomczyk met his destiny. His had been a privileged childhood of sorts. Growing up homeschooled on his family estate outside of Gwizdny, Poland, the young boy had few friends, though he did not lack for companionship. His doting parents spared no expense, neither in time nor the assets provided by the family's vast fortune, in encouraging and facilitating Virgil's prodigious talents in the arts. Most days, the young man could either be found in his private music room practicing on his custom-made Fazioli grand piano, or poring over volumes of 15th century poetry nestled in the library of his family's Polish home. By the age of 8, the prodigy had studied the works of the masters and found Chopin to be his favorite composer, with Francois Villon the poet he most admired. His encyclopedic knowledge of their works was impressive in itself, but Tomczyk had also studied the processes of writing. At the age of 9, Virgil decided to write his own poem. 2 years later, at 11, Virgil put musical accompaniment behind one of his works, writing his first song. It wasn't much, at least not as compositions go. In later years, Virgil himself would find its simplicity amusing. But to the brilliant young man, it was a revolution. For the first time, Virgil Tomczyk understood what it was he had been put on the planet to do. To study the greats, to understand their greatness. This had brought him happiness, but never satisfaction. But to create for himself, to grasp at greatness himself, the prodigy had found his calling. So at the age of 18, Virgil left the home he was born in to travel through Europe and to bring his musical vision to the world. But first, ever the idiosyncratic artist, the young man decided to drop his family name and forge a new future of his own. On that day, Virgil Tomczyk became Virgil Suicide.
This song's entitled CursedBlood.
CursedBlood, the story of BloodKitten. Suicide, while traveling, met a tall and lanky German transplant named Michael Misfortune in a Barcelona coffee shop. The two instantly became friends and would remain so throughout their adult lives. They made for an interesting spectacle as they walked the streets of Barcelona. Suicide, dressed eccentrically in heavy, dark, old-fashioned clothes, which draped his slight form in an impenetrable cloak of mystery, and Misfortune, whose tall frame was accentuated by the skin-tight, bright clothes he wore, several sizes too small. But fashion choices aside, the teenagers shared a deep bond forged by childhood education heavily steeped in the classics both of music and literature. They also shared a love for the obscure and the macabre, spending long hours reading and dissecting everything from Rabelais to Edgar Allan Poe. With such compatible artistic leanings, it was frankly inevitable that the pair would eventually join forces in Virgil's quest to bring the greatness he felt inside him to the world. The inseparable two quickly began talk of forming a band. Virgil had volumes of lyrics written, but the instrumentation that was to back it was still a mystery. No matter what he wrote, no matter how he manipulated the chords and notes of his beloved piano, everything he composed sounded stiff and impersonal, the echoes of other men's greatness, but not his own. One day, as he and Michael walked through the streets of Barcelona, they heard a local band performing in a filthy back alley bar. The band was not particularly good, and the guitar player himself was downright miserable. But something about the distorted resonance of the electric guitar suddenly set young Suicide aflame, and that night, in a fever, he went home and furiously composed music for every one of his lyrical creations. Misfortune, who was proficient at many instruments, had planned to back Suicide's piano with violin when they had originally spoke about a band. But he knew true inspiration when he heard it. After only a few rehearsals, it was clear that what they really needed was percussion to accentuate the violence of Virgil's guitar. BloodKitten was born. It was the spring of 1983, and Suicide had begun to simplify his writing style. He believed over-embellishment of language compromised most artists' work, obscuring the purity of true vision. Virgil decided that the most powerful art would be composed of only one word, though he himself sometimes compromised with small word phrases. His musical approach was also evolving. He eschewed his classical training and started to use his recently acquired electric guitar in unconventional manner. Using the guitar and amplifiers to manipulate distortion and feedback, Suicide molded a defiant, atonal sound into an atmospheric din, with his sparse, primitive lyricism as punctuation. To back this, Misfortune used his drums more as a beatnik hand drummer would use bongos, moving with the sporadic peaks and valleys of the poem's ebb and flow. Part 2, Segment 4, Track 3.
Track 5.
Oh, sorry, Track 5. This was BloodKitten, a name which came to Suicide in a dream and which he would carry with him through numerous incarnations into the present day. The two began playing various art spaces and coffee houses, building a buzz among Barcelona's avant-garde elite. Eventually, the band had gained enough of a following that it seemed advisable to record the music compiled during their stay in Barcelona. The two musicians moved to the north of France, where they rented a small chateau which they fitted out with a small 4-track recording system, and they set to work capturing their atonal musical kaleidoscope for posterity. They never named the 19-song album that was made during that summer, but the world would call it the Alexandria Recording, after the ancient legend of the Great Fire which reportedly destroyed the Library of Alexandria. It seems, on the night the record was finished, the chateau the two young men had rented mysteriously caught fire. Misfortune escaped the blaze entirely, but Suicide almost perished in the flames, having to be rescued by locals. Many believe Virgil himself started the fire as a suicide attempt, feeling the world wasn't deserving of his masterpiece, but no conclusive evidence of arson was ever found. Suicide himself refuses to address the issue in any way, and the truth about what really happened that night remains a mystery. Regardless, the master tapes of the Alexandria recording were burned mostly beyond recovery, and all but 2 songs were permanently destroyed, never to be recorded again. The infamous Bastard. After the fire and the accompanying investigations, Suicide and Misfortune found it advisable to seek a change of scenery, and the first place they chose to try was across the channel on the Isle of Britain. Misfortune had spent time there years before meeting Suicide, and Virgil was intrigued by the stories his friend told about the unhinged London music scene. The pair decided to go to the capital and see what could be seen. Perhaps it was serendipity, perhaps it was blind luck, but on that night and in that club, BloodKitten found a new direction. Notorious punk rock legend Johnny Switchblade's new band, Lead Pipe, was playing the night Virgil and Michael first came to London. Switchblade's exploits with law enforcement and his criminal behavior were legendary. His musical career included some of the UK's most violent bands, all of which Switchblade either formed or was a founding member of. Acts including She's Not Moving, Asphalt Whore, Prison Sex, and 10 Pound Fuck, each famed for their violent shows and criminal behavior, including but not limited to drug peddling, prostitution, and accessory to several robberies in the London area. When Suicide and Misfortune followed the Lead Pipe audience to the burned-out warehouse where the show was to take place, they couldn't have known how things would turn out. The opening acts went on without incident, but the crowd was clearly waiting for the main act. Finally, Lead Pipe hit the stage. The band didn't so much played as they did strike the audience with bursts of vicious rage, and the crowd responded in kind. Virgil and Misfortune alike were amazed by the vitality of the scene, if a little intimidated by the blood and violence. They were wondering what to do next, and whether they could manage to get off the premises alive when the show came to an abrupt end when Switchblade got into an argument with singer Ed Viscerate, which ended with Switchblade stabbing the helpless vocalist in the throat with a broken bottle. In the chaos that followed, Suicide and Misfortune found themselves face to face with the bloody and still raging Switchblade, and they did the only thing they could think of. They offered him a place to hide. After all, they were new to the area. No one knew who they were or where they were staying. and Virgil's not inconsiderable bank account assured that the two young men would be staying in a part of town that no one would expect to see Johnny Switchblade in. A born opportunist, Switchblade knew a good setup when he saw it, and before long, BloodKitten was in possession of a second guitar player and a brand new attitude. But what began as a hunted man's search for asylum soon changed against all odds, as a mutual respect grew between the musicians. The three, who were all near the same age, Johnny being the oldest at 23, Misfortune second at 20, and Virgil at 19, began to build a sound like nothing any of them had done before. A favorite hangout for the members of BloodKitten was the rundown movie theater found in... Repeat. A favorite hangout for the members of BloodKitten were the rundown movie theaters found in and around London. These grindhouses would show double, triple, and sometimes quadruple showings, and the musicians would spend night after night watching Italian crime films, blaxploitation films, and, Johnny's favorite, horror and slasher films. Many believe these nights in the grindhouse cineplexes would provide the themes BloodKitten would later adopt. In addition, Johnny himself had a huge impact on the band's music. His background in London's punk rock underground gave the band a newfound velocity, and his roaring guitar thickened Suicide's trademark atonal shrieks into a whole new level of songcraft. End of page. Practice refined this new sound, and several shows played around England, London of course being avoided due to the ongoing police search for Johnny, solidified the band as a hot ticket in the country. Deciding to strike while the iron was hot, studio time was booked to record the next BloodKitten project. Though the band had several songs written, only two made it to the 7-inch entitled Zyklon B Nightmare. The sessions took place during studio after hours, 3 a.m. to 7 a.m., which were the cheapest. The lineup was Virgil Suicide on guitar and lead vocal, Michael Misfortune on drums, Johnny Switchblade on guitar and backing vocals, and new recruit Dewey Fiddles, known as Little Nero, on bass. Little Nero, a small-time drug dealer around London, was an acquaintance of Switchblade's recruited to play bass in the group in the winter of 1985. BloodKitten's music had taken a giant change of direction from the Alexandria recordings. Virgil Suicide was writing more traditional songs with standard verse and chorus arrangements. The two songs fit the B horror slasher film criteria found in the seedy grindhouses of London perfectly. Suicide's Salem Baby was a hard-nosed punk take on the Salem witch hunts. The B-side was the only BloodKitten song not written by Suicide. Composed and sung by Switchblade, Mummies from Outer Space was of the same hard rock style of Salem Baby and really exemplified the low-rent monster movie theme. After the late-hour recording sessions of Zyklon B Nightmare were finished, the band was approached by a representative of Zang Records. The four members agreed to Zang's contract, and a pressing of 1,000 copies of Zyklon B Nightmare were set to be made. Sadly, the record company, which was already facing financial problems, was bought out and all of its assets confiscated. Included in their assets, of course, was the BloodKitten album. The band was unable to retrieve the master tapes, and ownership reverted to the new company, who felt the album and its seedy associations were beneath their notice. The release was doomed. Track 10, Part 3, Section 6. With no chance of releasing their record, BloodKitten began work on their next project, a full-length album composed of songs similar to those on Zyklon B Nightmare. But being as the band had no prospects of financial backing, stress levels were at an all-time high, leading to Dewey Fiddles quitting the band after an altercation with Switchblade. The remaining members booked a cheap studio and recorded a demo of their new material. These recordings were never planned to be released, but would eventually become known as the Raven Bootlegs. The recording sessions were filled with arguments between Suicide and Switchblade, and when word got to Suicide of a possible Lead Pipe reunion and UK tour, the singer grew frantic. He decided that the only way to preserve the integrity of his creation was to fire Switchblade. This action did not sit well with fans, and after several shows went spectacularly awry, with Virgil being pelted with spit, fruit, and liquor bottles, what remained of BloodKitten retreated to Suicide's country home. Seeing his band's future dissolved in setback after setback, Suicide put BloodKitten on indefinite hiatus and returned to France. Resurrection. To fans of BloodKitten, the prospect of a reformation and completion of the full-length album started by the band in the summer of 1986 seemed bleak. Some 20-odd years before, Virgil Suicide, the band's founder and chief songwriter, had placed the band on undefined hiatus after losing the master tapes to their first professionally released album when their recently acquired record label was forcefully taken over and all of its property seized. Suicide had moved to France after firing BloodKitten's lead guitarist Johnny Switchblade, and had spent the intervening years willfully having nothing to do with the music of his past. Instead, Suicide spent his days much as he did as a child, playing his piano and reading his beloved poetry. Michael Misfortune, the band's original drummer and co-founder, had followed Suicide to France, and the two were living together when Misfortune got word of Johnny Switchblade's resurgence on the punk scene. His new band, The Shanks, was much in the same style as Switchblade's earlier work, though considerably toned down as the guitarist had recently turned 45. The band's album was simply entitled The Shanks EP, and it was seeing some impressive buzz. After observing Switchblade's success, Misfortune decided to ask Suicide if he would consider trying to finish the full-length album they began so long ago.
Pause. Take a break. Take a drink. Voice crack.
Though Suicide was apprehensive about working with Switchblade, he agreed, and practice sessions were booked. Though the songs were the same in their basic form, they took on completely different styles, reflecting Suicide's return to his musical roots. The orchestration had become much more complex and melodic. The band enlisted Vincent Van Helsing on bass guitar and the Swedish-born Artemis Bloody Wrist Jansen on keyboards. The group felt confident and recording sessions were planned. The album, entitled Revenged Upon the Wings of a Raven, began again to take life. Regardless of the album's future, the story of BloodKitten is the stuff of legend. From its eccentric founder Virgil Suicide, through its tumultuous past, to its rich cast of characters, BloodKitten's legacy will remain a part of music folklore forever.
You couldn't stand being number two. You couldn't stand me not being with you. Thought there was only one thing to do. You know it's true. And there was someone I had to lose. You couldn't stand that beating at all. Oh. You gotta take